All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm really sorry I could not be there. Hopefully next year when you guys have this event, I can be there in person to meet everyone and talk about technology and what's going on. So the presentation I have for you guys today is about the infrastructure as a foundation for convergence. And really what we're talking about here is one of the biggest trends we're seeing in the market right now is the impact of convergence, right? That is something that's coming online. And what convergence means is that we're taking all these different technologies, like these different systems, and putting them all on the network. And when you put all these different systems together, you get a lot of benefits. And this could be in an office, this could be in a manufacturing plant, and that network really becomes important to the overall building. It's basically a critical function now of that building. And when you look at now the importance of that network, the underlying foundation for it is the cabling infrastructure. And so that's why we're talking about this is the infrastructure as a foundation for convergence. So, really the basic piece, the most important piece now of this critical function of your building, of your plant, of whatever, is your cabling, and really something then to think about as you're designing that building. So with that, my agenda here is I'm going to talk about a little bit about the impact of COVID, then talking about smart buildings, convergence, and this idea of the fourth utility. And then we're going to talk about some enabling technologies like power over Ethernet and Wi-Fi and DAS. And these are all things that are really important when you want to talk about making these next generation buildings. So first topic here is smart buildings. This is something here where, globally we're, you can't really talk about anything these days without saying, well, what happened due to COVID, right? And what's happening and what's the impact on the office and smart buildings and whatnot. My understanding is that in Egypt, by and large, people are back to the office, but really when you look at globally right now, that's still not the case. There's still a lot of people still working remotely from home. Within the United States, we're still, we're starting to see companies saying you need to come in now 1 to 2 days a week. And it makes a lot of sense. From a cultural standpoint, it's very needed to have people in the same building together to build that culture, to build those personal relationships. I know when I went remote, it was very challenging, especially for those first couple of months without having that in-person interaction. But what benefited me was the fact that I knew a lot of the people I'd been working with, right? We had been out to dinner, had lunch together, had drinks together. So it was very, I won't say it was easy, but it made the transition a lot easier. Since then, we've had people coming into Panduit. I've got some new employees that work for me, and I can just see the challenges of them, building those relationships, right? Having that, sidebar conversation or reaching out to someone you don't know to ask a favor, right? That's very hard to do. And so from our standpoint, right, we really see people coming back more and more and more to the office. But as people are coming back, there's really two things that we're seeing that are emerging is one, enabling that hybrid office. So within the US, right, I mean, before COVID hit, Panduit had kind of this slightly flexible work from home structure where you could work from home, say 1 day a week, but it had to be the same day a week. And, it was tolerated, I'll say, but it was not necessarily loved. But now I really see that changing post-COVID, right? People are going to be working from home, and you might want to work from home because, your kid has a day off from school, or there's somebody that come over to work on your house or apartment. And that flexibility is great. I mean, I know we've had people come over to do something at our house, and it's been nice just being able to say, I'm going to sit at home today and do my work. And when the guy knocks on the door, I'll be there to greet him and make sure he does a good job. So the hybrid office is here to stay. And the one thing we see from that now is that when people are working from home, they need to have the same experience they have working from home that they would in the office. So if you remember back, prior to COVID, if you were traveling and you were calling into a meeting and you were the guy on the phone, you weren't experiencing the meeting the same as everyone there. I mean, I distinctly remember there'd be times where you would say, hey, I'm going to go draw on this whiteboard. And I would have no idea, you know, if I was on the phone, I have no idea what's going on that whiteboard, right? And you're trying to sit there, listen and hear. So one thing we see is that's going, you know, that's going to slowly move away, right? People are going to start developing ways where if I'm at home, I'm going to have the same experience as people will sitting in that office. So that's one trend we're seeing. The other one, and that's relevant to this talk as well, is that making the office somewhere that you want to go. So smart buildings are ideal for this, right? I know when I was at a conference about 2 weeks ago, we were listening to this firm, CBRE. They manage a lot of commercial real estate. And what they were saying is that from a leasing standpoint, COVID, especially, you know, in the US and in Europe, has been very challenging on leases. A lot of company, you know, CBRE rents buildings to people and maintains those buildings. And they said that, you know, by and large, you know, right, it's been rough. But what they have said is that premium buildings, they're doing fine with, and they define premium as good location and also buildings that are well designed. And that's well designed, you know, especially from a, you know, it's good technology inside the building, right? And good connectivity and good, you know, ways to connect devices. So buildings that are desirable to be in, we're leasing well. And that's something we see to help also drive people back into the office, is making that office somewhere that people want to go. And so the rough numbers we're seeing, and this is, you know, probably this is at a global level, is somewhere, you know, buildings are returning about 75 to 85% of occupancy. Within the US, I mean, the companies that you probably know, companies like Apple, they are building new office space. They are investing. I know Disney's also building office space. These innovative firms are expecting employees to return to work because they see the advantages they get from innovation. And one of the ways we see that happening is that by making these buildings a desirable place, by making these buildings smart, by making them converge, we will get people back into the office. And so this slide just really kind of highlights, you know, the convergence that has gone on in history, right? And, you know, what we're seeing now is just more and more devices coming on, and that's really just building on things that have been done. And so really, you're right, we started out with data, right? I mean, you're just getting data to the desk. That's nothing special. The next thing we saw was voice, where you have, you know, voice over IP phones, and how that was a pretty neat thing, and that was nice to have. Then you went to Wi-Fi. We started seeing video surveillance. I distinctly remember sitting in a conference a few years ago about security cameras, and, you know, in terms of running those over IP, those all used to run over, you know, just kind of like coax or other cables. The guy said that, you know, the adoption, and this was probably, I'll say maybe 10 years ago, at that point, you know, more cameras were already running over IP than coax, because everyone with these cameras saw the advantages of putting them over the network. And he said the adoption of these IP-based cameras and these converged cameras were much quicker than they expected. Some of the other things are access control, HVAC. HVAC, I mean, some of these things, they're still not exactly fully converged. There's a lot of systems out there that still don't run on it, but it's stuff you can now do. And the new trends we're seeing now and putting things on the network are sensors, it's lighting, and it's stuff like AV over IP. And now all these different systems will be running over the network. And it's all supported by a 25-year cable. You know, it's it's likely going to be copper, right, for a lot of these systems. So all these different systems, and more are coming online, are all now running over the network. And so what we've been seeing with this, right, is you have all these different types of protocols, right, that have existed over the years, you know, from, you know, video, audio, power, everything, right? It's all been converging over the RJ45, right? The RJ45 is the global unifying connector. And that is just something very important to note. And that is something, you know, obviously at Panduit, that we are doing everything we can to support and make that easier. So one of the things I want to show you guys as well on this is just to give a simple example about why convergence is so well. And so I'm not going to get technical on this. I'm just going to show you this diagram here. And this is a lighting diagram. And all this is really, it's a old lighting technology, right? It can do an occupancy and vacancy. It has a dimming switch connected to it, and it controls the light. So if you can imagine here, right, that this is basically a system where you can manually adjust the lighting, but it also has a sensor where it can essentially turn on, turn off lights based on whether or not people are there. And you can just see it's a complicated wiring diagram, really, right? And, if you look at this, right, I mean, well, what if you wanted to change some of the functionality? It's a challenge to do it, right? I mean, that's all hardwired. This is a proprietary based system. So you probably need to get somebody in that's, new to this, right? And so when you start thinking, okay, this is what the old system looks like, right? What does it mean if I go to these converged systems? Here's my wiring diagram. It gets very, very simple. And you can already tell by looking at this, right? I mean, imagine all the things you can do on this, right? So, I mean, just simply here, right, you have a PoE switch connecting to essentially a hub that's going out to different lights, as well as an occupancy, vacancy sensor, and a dimming scene. There's different ways this can be cabled up these days. I mean, this is just an example from one vendor that we work with from time to time. But you can already see all the things you can do with this, right? I mean, if I were to say, hey, I need to adjust something, right? I want to do some daylight harvesting. I want to make it so that the lights in a certain part of the building, right, they dim when it gets bright in the room, or it gets the lights turn on when it gets dark. That's easy to do. And it's easy to adjust, right? It's just a simple converged system where you probably have a nice front end interface on it. And if you want to make some changes to it, that's easy. I will say at Panduit's headquarters, it used to almost be something that made us laugh a little bit, because I used to work by a window and there were shades that controlled the window. And every day at certain times of year, the sun would come down. So it was shining right in that window, and the shades were actually down for a lot of it. But when it reached a certain height, all of a sudden the shades would go up and the sun would be blaring right in your face. So then we'd have to go and adjust the shades. And it's because, Panduit tried to design a fully converged building many years ago, but what happened was at the time, they couldn't do something like this, right? The technology just was not there. And so they had something that's essentially a hardwired system that could have used a little bit of improvement, but they couldn't really do it. And with something like this, I mean, you can just see all the different features you can have. I mean, something else, the one thing on there says white light color tuning. That is something that is a very, it's something we're seeing a little bit more of here. So, it's how you want the lights tuned, and that makes a difference based on how people interact with it. So if you imagine that, the way I like to see a lot of my lights, especially in my house, is they've kind of got this yellow hue to it, right? And that just hit, a little bit more calming effect. Whereas if you add a little bit of blue to the light or brightness, and you take away that yellow, it kind of creates that harsher light. That's, at least harsher is how I describe it. And a lot of these lights, if you add a little bit of blue to it, say in the morning, it kind of wakes you up a little bit, right? It forces you to concentrate more. So you can actually adjust on how people think and, improve people's productivity just by doing a few tricks with the overall lighting. And it's all possible when you go with these converged buildings. So I just thought I'd give you this example to show that, going with the converged infrastructure really provides just a lot of benefits that are, simple, it's upgradable, it's flexible. So now something to think about, right? We're kind of highlighting the overall importance of the network, right? And one of the ways we like to refer to it at Panduit is, I like calling it the fourth utility. And so just so we're all on the same page and what that means is that a utility is a business that furnishes an everyday necessity to the public at large, right? And so you can think of these everyday necessities would include stuff like electricity, water, and gas, right? I mean, these are things that you essentially need, to exist, right, in a modern society in many ways. I mean, especially, I live in the Midwest, and it's getting cold here, right? I mean, I essentially need electric and gas just to keep my house warm. So these are very, very important. But really the concept that we need to think about now with the network is that the network really is becoming that fourth utility, right? And some of the key elements of it is that the network is going to provide data and power, right? So really everything in your building is almost could be running off the network, especially on these converged buildings. All your functions, right? It could be, everything from how people get in the building, the lighting in the building, and then how people sit down and do work, right? Even the security systems in the building might be on the network. So that network is absolutely critical to the functioning of these converged networks. And the foundation for that network is a robust cabling infrastructure from somebody like a Panduit, right? We do know that even as a Panduit side, some of our most loyal accounts, people that have been with us for years, they were using lower quality cabling infrastructure because it's just something that for a lot of people, they look and say, a jack's a jack, cable's a cable. What difference does it make, right? And they find that that's not really the case, right? There are differences in terms of, manufacturing ability, tolerances, and everything else. And those tolerances and all these other factors can really add up to make, a unreliable termination or connection when you put a plug into a jack, and that can create problems. And when your whole building is running off that network, having a couple of problems like this can be a really big deal. So it is important that now that the network is controlling everything, that you have that reliable cabling infrastructure. And so I've talked a bit about the importance of these smart buildings and these converged systems. And what I want to do is just talk about some of the enabling technologies for it. And these are things that are really, we talk about the high level, right? What are the benefits you get from a converged building? But now what are the underlying technologies that go into that smart building? So a few of the basic concepts here are that a good and reliable network is a business necessity, right? Reliable connectivity brings people into the office. I was actually planning to work from home today and give this presentation, but luckily I live close to the office, and yesterday afternoon, for some strange reason, I was having all sorts of problems with the network at my house. I don't know what it is. Maybe someone was doing road work. Maybe someone was downloading a bunch of movies next door to me. I don't know what it was, but all afternoon yesterday, I essentially had to log off my network, go onto my phone, and have a few meetings just via my phone. And so reliable connectivity does bring people into the office. And if you get outside of the thought of the office, is that people do not want to live, shop, work in places that do not have this seamless connectivity. I mean, I can tell you in my neighborhood, where there's restaurants, where there's malls and other places, I know exactly which places have good, reliable connections, because if you walk in somewhere, it's like a lot of times I'll walk into this mall or somewhere, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I can't really get the network on it, right? And so that's an important factor where a lot of times, people want these spaces with good, reliable connectivity. I know when I was listening and talking to the CBRE guys, when they were saying in these premium spaces, having that good, seamless wireless connectivity is critical for leasing a space. I'm not just talking about Wi-Fi, I'm talking about distributed antenna systems for that in-building wireless. A lot of times a client might come into a building, holds up his cell phone, and wants to know that he can get a cell phone signal from inside that building before he leases it. So two of these, one of these enabling technologies is power over Ethernet. It is a very important technology. It's much more reliable than wireless. And really two of the factors there are batteries and interference, right? So if you try to replace a wired network with something that's wireless, say you want to put in all these sensors, these are wireless sensors, you really have to be sure that the battery is going to last, or you have a maintenance schedule for those batteries, and that there is no interference that could, eventually cause some of those sensors to not work as functions as planned. And so really wired systems are more reliable, and that's what we recommend. So one of the big things here on these enabling technologies is building communication systems. And a lot of times, one of the things we've been hearing is this conflict between Wi-Fi, right? That's how you get, essentially your internet on your phone when you're inside, or these distributed antenna systems, or DAS. And DAS is just a way where if you have a cellular signal, you bring that cellular signal into the building. And these distributed antenna systems, right? Both of these things have benefits to them. Wi-Fi, it works on everything, right? It's not proprietary. DAS tends to work with different carriers. And a challenge a lot of times has now is buildings are designed to essentially be very energy efficient. So that means they're putting up these glass that's designed to reflect, radiation from the sun, but it also reflects radiation from the cell towers. So in a lot of these buildings you go into now, these newer ones, you can't get a cell phone signal by design, unless you have a distributed antenna system that brings that signal into the building. But one of our beliefs at Panduit is that these two systems are really complementary. They are not in conflict. A lot of times people might say, well, with 5G, is DAS going to replace Wi-Fi? Or why would someone install a DAS system when I have a solid Wi-Fi network that can work with everything? And what we're seeing is that it's really going to be a combination of both, right? They have different strengths. Wi-Fi is used for data transmission. It's suitable for streaming. It supports IoT devices and security devices. DAS, it's used for voice and data. It distributes the cellular signal, and there is no login needed for a DAS system, right? Your phone just, your phone won't tell you what's on a DAS system, right? It just automatically connects to it. So really one of the big things we're seeing on the Panduit side is that it's not Wi-Fi or DAS, it's Wi-Fi and DAS. A lot of the predictions we're seeing right now is that more traffic is going to be on or handed off from DAS to Wi-Fi than ever before. And when you look at a lot of these new DAS systems, they're running on the same fiber and the same copper connectivity that Panduit is providing. The older systems would run on coax. I mean, they're still installed today, but a lot of these newer ones, it's really a fiber backbone, and you either have fiber going out to the different antenna devices, or it could be copper. And it's really important that when you're looking at a good building design, that you're looking at both the Wi-Fi portion of it and the DAS portion of it. So I did talk a little bit here about distributed antenna systems. Another one to talk about here is on the Wi-Fi side. And you can see here that we're really going from Wi-Fi 5, 5 to 6 to 7. And really, I almost need to update this, because this is not just Wi-Fi 6, but it's Wi-Fi 6 and something that's called Wi-Fi 6E these days. And you can see that things keep growing and growing and growing, right? You're talking about almost at 10 gigabits per second with the new Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 7 access points. And the recommended cable, really from Wi-Fi 5 and beyond, is a Category 6A cable. We at Panduit are recommending at least 2 cables to go to a Wi-Fi 7 access point. These aren't out yet, but they will be in the future. And running these 2 6A cables really allows for future proofing of these Wi-Fi devices. So we see a ton of opportunity here with running cabling to these wireless access points. It's something that really, when you look at these corporate installations, what people are doing at these headquarters, they are really putting in 6A cable to the access points as a default. This is not even a debate. They know these access points need the data rate, and they know they need to put the 6A cables to those wireless access points to really provide that bandwidth that is needed. And our recommendation at Panduit is at least 2 6A cables go to every access point that you put. And it's really that on day 1, you're going to need at least one of those cables. And on day 2, you might need it for Wi-Fi 7, or you may need it to even just add another access point somewhere nearby. Another enabling technology here is power over Ethernet. And power over Ethernet is really something that enables convergence. It is where you get the data and power over that single cable, right? And when you look at it, there's a lot of different PoE types out there. You have the old PoE standard that's providing up to 13 watts to an end device, as well as you have these new PoE standards, this PoE++, 4-pair PoE, that provides up to 71 watts of power. 71 watts is a lot of power. It can power most displays, most cameras. It really can just get almost all your different devices on the network on it. And when you see these new PoE++ standard, you can see that it's running at a data rate of 10 G base T. So, when you look at it, I mean, what's a good application for 10 G base T? Well, we're talking about the wireless access points that can connect. And, again, PoE is just a very good technology that is enabling people to run all these different devices around the network and still connect everything together with a single cable. And, from our standpoint at Panduit, the one thing to be aware about it with PoE is the fact that it can cause the cable to get hotter when you run a bunch of cables in the bundle, because 71 watts is a decent amount of power. And we do recommend using our 6A cables to run, especially these next generation standards. Our 6A cables have excellent heat dissipative properties. and it really gives you the optimal performance, right? You're getting that 10 G-base-T performance with 6A, and really your optimal thermal efficiency and performance. So I don't have a lot of details on that in this presentation, but it's certainly something that if you talk to people at Trident, we can provide more information on this as well. This just shows the overall growth of PoE by application type. And you can see here that it's just it's growing at a very good rate, right? I mean, we're expecting it to decrease 11 and 12% annually. This was the latest chart I had here about PoE growth. And it obviously does not account for the impact of the pandemic. But what we've almost seen right now from a recovery standpoint is that while 2020 was down in terms of demand, 2021, the year we're in right now, has bounced right back. And when you look over here on the side here on this chart, right, you can see that, you know, IP phones, cameras, and access points are some of the biggest users of PoE at this time. And to really highlight the growth potential here is we're expecting there to be essentially billions of sensors connected, right? We're expecting all these other systems like, you know, lighting, access control, and all this to come onto the network to be running off of PoE. And you can see that there really is not a lot of that right now. So when this thing says 11 to 13% annually, there's a lot more growth potential in here than we're seeing. And so I just want to really highlight the importance and the potential for PoE. The one thing I love talking about here as well is what about batteries? Because a lot of times I hear that, well, you know, you say wired is best practice, you say this, why not just use a battery technology for this, right? Why not just do that? And the example I want to highlight here is just, it's a simple example. Is to say a warehouse or something in the future. It's 1 million square feet. You got about 10,000 wireless devices just spread around. These could be sensors, whatever. And these sensors, these batteries have a lifespan of about 5 years. So let's just say you install them all on day one. Come by year 5, you're going to be replacing about 2,000 batteries a year, right? And that equates to about 10 batteries a day. Now, if you really think about how these systems work and how you replace a battery, it's likely in the ceilings. It could be somewhere hard to get. These things are not going to be quick to do, right? You're going to have some guy needs to get on a ladder, go look for it, whatever. And what's ultimately going to happen is that if you really want to keep all 10,000 devices active, you need at least half a person whose full-time job it is to go around and replace batteries. I know when I was talking to somebody at Cisco a while back, they had even mentioned to me that if they, their rough numbers say that if you want at any given time, 30% of your devices to not be working, go with batteries, right? I know even at my house, comparing, I have some things that are wired in the house and some things that are not wired and are wireless. The wireless devices like to fail, and they like to fail in the middle of the night when I'm out of town. So I'll wake up, and have quite a few angry text messages from my wife that says, hey, something was beeping. What the hell was that last night? And so it's why we do recommend, and we say wired is best practice. And, these are the reasons why. And so there's further convergence reading available. We have a nice white paper that talks about, the Cisco Catalyst 9000. It's a good paper on using Panduit cables for Wi-Fi 6. That's excellent down there. There's a link that if you want more reading, as well as Panduit is a partnership with Rockwell Automation, and we talk about converged plant-wide Ethernet architecture. So that's another example there. You can see it's on the Rockwell Automation website. These are both papers that talk about Panduit working with our partners to enable convergence, and us on the physical infrastructure side. So, and really, this is my last slide here I'm going to talk to. And we talked a lot about why a high quality infrastructure matters, right? And the thing I wanted to point out is that all these things are running over your network, right? A huge percentage of your network problems are caused by the physical infrastructure, right? You can see these two numbers here, 59%, 70%, somewhere around there of network issues are related to the physical infrastructure. And so when you look at the cost of installing these networks, right, when you roll in the cost of the hardware, when you roll in the cost of the software, all these elements, The passive physical infrastructure, right? The stuff that I sell, that's only 5% of your total CapEx. It is also the longest element of your network, right? So if you imagine a hardware piece, right, that might last 5 to 10 years at most. Software, 3 to 5. And so this cabling lasts for 25. And so what I'm telling you here, right, is that these, this physical network that Panduit sells, it is the most common problem you will have in your network. It is also going to be the longest lasting piece of that network. But overall, it represents the smallest piece of your investment. And that's why at Panduit, we say, it really does matter to install that high quality infrastructure. It is so important, and it's going to be with you a long time. And when you work with Panduit, there's all these factors you can consider that we can help you with, in regards to your physical infrastructure. So are there any questions?
Okay, thanks, Frank. I think just for the sake of time, we really need to move on. So thanks, Frank.
Okay. Thank you, guys.